Good morning and most welcome to Heidegger 1145. I will today honor the lecture to the Honorable David Bohm, the American physicist that created a model of quantum mechanics that is a first step on the ladder to understand quantum physics. I will also mention an article of Dirk F. Meyer about the Holoflux, and I will add some things from Robert Magliola of healing deconstruction. And I apologize for my voice. It's a bit scrubby. Let's see if it eases up during the day. I brought some hot beverage here, could be helpful. This article is from the web magazine Quantum Physics. It is called David Bohm, Implicate Order and Holomovement. Space is not empty, it is full, a plenum as opposed to vacuum, and is the ground for the existence of everything, including ourselves. The universe is not separate from this cosmic sea of energy. Quote of David Bohm himself. David Bohm was one of the most distinguished theoretical physicists of his generation and a fearless challenger of scientific orthodoxy. His interests and influence extended far beyond physics and embraced biology, psychology, philosophy, religion, art, and the future of society. Underlying his innovative approach to many different issues was the fundamental idea that beyond the visible, tangible world, there lies a deeper, implicate order of undivided wholeness. David Bohm was born in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, December 20th, 1917. He went to Pennsylvania State University to study physics and later to the University of California at Berkeley to work on his PhD thesis with none other than Robert Oppenheimer. Yeah, Bob Oppenheimer. While at Berkeley, Bohm, an idealist, became involved in politics, and he was labeled a communist by the FBI, led by the infamous J. Edgar Hoover. This prevented him from getting a clearance to work with Oppenheimer on the Manhattan Project at Los Alamos to produce the first atomic bomb during the Second World War. However, while working on his doctorate at Berkeley, he discovered the scattering calculations of collisions of protons and deuterons. which was used by the Manhattan Project team and was immediately classified. As a result, Bohm was denied access to his own work and wasn't allowed to write or defend his thesis. Oppenheimer had to certify before the faculty of the university that Bohm had indeed successfully completed his research. Bohm was finally awarded his PhD in physics. Bohm was surprised to find that once electrons were in a plasma, they stopped behaving like individuals and started behaving as if they were part of a larger interconnected whole. In 1947, he became an assistant professor at Princeton University, where he met Albert Einstein. Einstein found Bohm to be a kindred spirit, a like-minded colleague, with whom he could have fascinating conversations about the nature of the universe. He extended his research to study of electrons in metals. Once again, the seemingly haphazard movements of individual electrons managed to produce highly organized overall effects. Bohm's innovative work in this area established his reputation as a theoretical physicist. In 1951, Bohm wrote a classic textbook entitled Quantum Theory, in which he presented a clear account of the orthodox Copenhagen interpretation of quantum physics. The Copenhagen interpretation was formulated mainly by Niels Bohr and Werner Heisenberg in the 1920s and is still highly influential today. But even before the book was published, Bohm began to have doubts about the assumptions underlying the conventional approach. The Holomovement is a key concept in David Bohm's interpretation of quantum mechanics, and for his overall worldview, it brings together the holistic principle of undivided wholeness with the idea that everything is in a state of process or becoming, or what he calls the universal flux. For Bohm, wholeness is not a static oneness, but a dynamic wholeness in motion, in which everything moves together in an interconnected process. The concept is presented most fully in Wholeness and the Implicate Order, published in 1980. Referring to quantum theory, Bohm's basic assumption is that elementary particles are actually systems of extremely complicated internal structure. acting essentially as amplifiers of information contained in a quantum wave. This is the cue, I would say. This is the key to understanding all quantum mechanics. And this is the easiest formulation I come upon so far. It could actually be even what I would call a backdoor into quantum mechanics. I would repeat it once more. Elementary particles are actually systems of extremely complicated internal structure, acting essentially as amplifiers of information contained in a quantum wave. As a consequence, he has evolved a new and controversial theory of the universe, a new model of reality that Bohm calls the implicate order. The theory of the implicate order contains an ultra-holistic cosmic view. It connects everything with everything else. In principle, any individual element could reveal detailed information about every other element in the universe. The central underlying theme of Bohm's theory is the unbroken wholeness of totality of existence as an undivided flowing movement without borders. During the early 1980s, Bohm developed his theory of the implicate order in order to explain the bizarre behavior of subatomic particles, behavior that quantum physicists have not been able to explain. Basically, two subatomic particles that have once interacted can instantaneously respond to each other's motions thousands of years later when they are light years apart. This sort of particle interconnectedness requires superluminal signaling. Superluminal?
Superluminal. Lumen is light. Super is above the light. Superluminal. No. Above luminal should be an adjective, so it's something above the light.
Super, yeah, above maybe?
Yes, super above the light,
something that is disallowed since the Morrison MM theory, 1874. The highest velocity that we have in the universe. I was just mentioning this because in the next lecture we are going to speak about this very thing, and it's called C. Which is faster than the speed of light. This odd phenomena is called the EPR effect, named after the Einstein, Podolsky, and oddly now, Rosen thought experiment. Bohm believes that the bizarre behavior of the subatomic particles might be caused by unobserved subquantum forces and particles. Indeed, the apparent weirdness might be produced by hidden means that pose no conflict with ordinary ideas of causality and reality. And time itself might actually be derived from an even deeper level of objective reality. This reality he calls the implicate order. Within the implicate order, everything is connected, and in theory, any individual element could reveal information about every other element in the universe. Borrowing ideas from holographic photography, the hologram is Bohm's favorite metaphor for conveying the structure of the implicate order. Holography relies upon wave interference. If two wavelengths of light are of differing frequencies, they will interfere with each other and create a pattern. Because a hologram is recording detail down to the wavelength of light itself, listen now, it is also a dense information storage. Bohm notes that a hologram clearly reveals how a total content in principle extending over the whole of space and time is enfolded in the movements of waves, electromagnetic and other kinds, in any given region. The hologram illustrates how information about the entire holographed scene is enfolded into every part of the film. It resembles the implicate order in the sense that every point on the film is completely determined by the overall configuration of the interference patterns. Even a tiny chunk of holographic film will reveal the unfolded form of an entire three-dimensional object. And this is also important, my conclusion. It will also, to all views, be that object. Proceeding from his holographic analogy, Bohm proposes a new order, the implicate order, where everything is enfolded into everything. This in contrast to the explicate order, where things are unfolded. Bohm puts it thus: The actual order, i.e. the implicate order, itself has been recorded in the complex movements of electromagnetic fields in the form of light waves. Such movement of light waves is present everywhere and in principle unfolds the entire universe of space and time in each region. This unfoldment and unfoldment takes place not in the movement of the electromagnetic field, but also in that of other fields. These fields obey quantum mechanical laws, implying the properties of discontinuity and non-locality. The totality of the movements of unfoldment and unfoldment may go immensely beyond what has revealed itself to our observations. We call this totality by the name Holomovement. Bohm believes that the implicate order has to be extended into a multidimensional reality. In other words, the Holomovement endlessly unfolds and unfolds into infinite dimensionality. Within this milieu, there are independent subtotalities. Among those, the physical elements and human entities, with relative autonomy. The layers of the implicate order can go deeper and deeper to the ultimately unknown. It is this unknown and undescribable totality that Bohm calls the Holomovement. The Holomovement is the fundamental ground of all matter. That is, it's the ground of everything. In collaboration with Stanford neuroscientist Carl Pribram, Bohm was involved in the early development of the holonomic model of the functioning of the brain. A model for human cognition that is drastically different from conventionally accepted ideas. Bohm worked with Pribram on the theory that the brain operates in a manner similar to a hologram in accordance with quantum mathematical principles and the characteristics of wave patterns. The holonomic brain theory or model developed by neuroscientist Carl Pribram, initially in collaboration with physicist David Bohm, is a model of human cognition that describes the brain as a holographic storage network. Pribram suggests these processes involve electric oscillations in the brain's fine fibered dendritic webs, which are different from the more commonly known action potentials involving axons and synapses. These oscillations are waves. Remember that, waves. And create, even more important, wave interference patterns in which memory is encoded naturally in a way that can be described with the Fourier transformation equations. Pribram and others noted the similarities between these brain processes and the storage of information in a hologram, which also uses Fourier transformations. In a hologram, any part of the hologram with sufficient size contains the whole of the stored information Thank you very much. This model allows for important aspects of human consciousness, including the fast associative memory that allows for connections between different pieces of stored information, and the non-locality of memory storage. A specific memory is not stored in a specific location, i.e., a certain neuron. A main characteristic of a hologram is that every part of the stored information is distributed over the entire hologram. So every little part, down to the smallest minuscule proton neutrino, contains the whole. Both processes of storage and retrieval are carried out in a way described by Fourier transformation equations. As long as a part of the hologram is large enough to contain the interference pattern, that part can recreate the entirety of the stored image, except with more unwanted changes. called noise. An analogy to this is the broadcasting region of a radio antenna. In each smaller individual location within the entire area, it is possible to access every channel, similar to how the entirety of information of a hologram is contained within a part. Another analogy of hologram is the way sunlight illuminates objects in the visual field of an observer. It doesn't matter how narrow the beam of sunlight is. The beam always contains all the information of the object, and when conjugated by a lens of the camera or the eyeball, produces the same full three-dimensional image. The Fourier transform formula converts spatial forms to spatial wave frequencies and vice versa. As all objects are in essence vibratory structures, different types of lenses acting similarly to optic lenses can alter the frequency nature of information that is transferred. And when I here say lenses, you can see different modus of thinking, different attitude. Those are also lenses. Why? Well, because the Fourier transformations are information complexes as well as waves. They are actually the very same thing. This non-locality of information storage within the hologram is crucial, because even if most parts are damaged, the entirety will be contained within even a single remaining part of sufficient size. Pribram and others noted the similarities between an optical hologram and a memory storage in the human brain. Even when it is damaged, it is only when there exist no parts big enough to contain the whole that the memory is lost. And this so elegantly goes both for brain, those Fourier transformations, for light, and the entirety of the universe, which is also a most complex wave. This can also explain why some children retain normal intelligence when large portions of their brain, in some cases half, are removed. It can also explain why memory is not lost when the brain is sliced in different cross-section. A single hologram can store 3D information in a TD way. Such properties may explain some of the brain's abilities, including the ability to recognize objects at different angles and sizes than in the original stored memory. Bohm proposed that neural holograms were formed by the diffraction patterns of oscillating electric waves within the very cortex. It is important to note that the difference between the idea of a holonomic brain and a holographic one. Bohm does not suggest that the brain functions as a single hologram. Rather, the waves within smaller neural networks create localized holograms within the larger workings of the brain. This patch holography is called holonomy, or windowed Fourier transformations. You can see that as different holograms interacting with each other and reaching out to the bigger, more encompassing. A holographic model can also account for other features of memory that more traditional models cannot. The Hopfield memory model has an early memory saturation point before which memory retrieve drastically slow and become unreliable. On the other hand, holographic memory models have much larger theoretical storage capacity. Holographic models can also demonstrate associative memory, can store connections between different concepts, and resemble forgetting through lossy storage. Information, quote from Bohm. The actual nature of information and the way it is carried is not yet entirely clear. It is really correct, for example, is it really correct, for example, to speak of a field of information? Since information does not fall off with distance, neither is it associated with energy in the usual sense. Possibly the notion of field should be widened, or at the quantum level we should be talking about pre-space structures, or about algebraic relationships that precede the structures of space and time. End of quote. Bohm's notion of active information, another term, is tied to his ontological interpretation, formerly the causal or hidden variable interpretation, and even before that I have to add the pilot wave of Prince de Broglie. I proposed it be freed from any particular theory and raised to the level of a general principle. Bohm never considered his ontological interpretation to be the last word on quantum theory, rather that it would suggest insight and avenues for further research. I believe that one of the most valuable is this notion of information. Quote, yes, if you say that all matter actually works from information, not merely matter in the nervous system, or DNA matter working in the cell, but even the electron is forming from empty space, being informed, as it were, by some unknown source of information, which may be all over the space. And then we can not have, there is no sharp division between thought, emotion, and matter. I think that sentence should be, then we cannot have a sharp division between thought, emotion, and matter. You see that they flow into each other. Even in ordinary experience, you have thought and emotion flow into a movement of matter in the body. Or directly through some system. But if you say that the entire ground of existence is enfolded in space, that all matter is coming out of that space, including ourselves, our brains, our thoughts, then the information might gradually wade the space so that matter starts to. You can say that matter is always forming according to whatever information it has. And therefore, the thought process, very important, could alter that information content. So I would say that it does look possible, though I think very careful experiments have to be done before we can say that it actually does take place. And I would say this is a very easy way of explaining the role of the observer. It becomes clearer in this explanation how we partake, and that we are both me as an observer and what I observed part of a greater thing, a hologram. And from that implicate order comes thinking, matter and emotion, but also influences all those parts. It's an interactive ability, interaction. This is the Holomovement. Because a hologram is recording detail down to the wavelength of light itself. It is also a dense information storage. Bohm notes that the hologram clearly reveals how a total content, in principle extending over the whole of space and time, is enfolded in the movement of waves, electromagnetic and other kinds, in any given region. The hologram illustrates how information about the entire holographed scene is enfolded into every part of the film. It resembles the implicate order in the sense that every point on the film is completely determined by the overall configuration of the interference patterns. Even a tiny chunk of the holographic film will reveal the unfolding form of an entire three-dimensional object. Matter, animate and inanimate. I think I round up some coffee here if it's possible. Just a little bit. Sorry. It is my throat bothering me. That'll be enough, thank you very much. It resembles the implicate order in the sense that every point on the film is completely determined by the overall configuration of the interference patterns. Interference patterns of the overlying waves. Many waves create an interference pattern. Matter, animate and inanimate. Right off, Bohm refers to the particle, the most essential building block of matter. He considers the particle fundamentally to be only an abstraction that is manifest to our senses. Basically, for Bohm, the whole cosmos is matter. In his own words, quote, "What is always a totality of ensembles, all present together in an ordinary series of stages of enfoldment and unfoldment, which intermingle and interpenetrate each other in principle throughout the whole of space. My parenthesis, aletheia, thea, end of my parenthesis. Bohm's explicate order, however, is secondary, derivative. It flows out of the law of the implicate order, a law that stresses the relationship between the unfolded structures that interweave each other throughout cosmic space, rather than between the abstracted and separate forms that manifest to the senses. Bohm's explanation of manifest is basically that in certain suborders within the whole set of implicate order, there is a totality of forms that have an approximate kind of recurrence, stability, and separability, end of quote. These forms are capable of appearing tangible, solid, and thus make up our manifest world. My parenthesis, the Ionian philosophers of nature, end of my parenthesis. Bohm also declares that the implicate order has to be extended into a multidimensional reality. In principle, this reality is one unbroken whole, including the entire universe with all its fields and particles. Thus we have to say that the Holomovement enfolds and unfolds in a multidimensional order, the dimensionality of which is effectively infinite. Thus the principle of relative autonomy of subtotalists is now seen to extend to the multidimensional order of reality. So the subtotalists is what classical physics are mainly observing, but here is pointing to that they are coming from the Holomovement, a greater holographic whole. Bohm illustrates this higher dimensional reality by showing the relationship of two televised images of a fish tank, where the fish are seen through two walls at right angles to one another. What is seen, and this is most interesting, what is seen is that there is a certain relationship between the images appearing on the two screens. They sort of show the same fish, but with the fish tank from different angles. We know that there is a single actuality in a higher dimensionality, because the television images are two-dimensional projections of a three-dimensional reality, which holds these two-dimensional projections within it. These projections are only abstractions, but the three-dimensional reality is neither of these. Rather, it is something else, something of a nature beyond both. So it contains all of it and yet a lot more. If there is apparent evolution in the universe, it is because the different scales of dimensions of reality are already implicit in its structure. Bohm uses the analogy of the seed being informed to produce a living plant. The same can be said of all living matter. Life is unfolded in the totality, and even when it is not manifest, it is somehow implicit. The Holomovement is the ground for both life and matter. There is no dichotomy. What lies ahead? Well, Bohm ventured into consciousness itself. Bohm conceives of consciousness as more than information and the brain. Rather, it is information that enters into consciousness. For Bohm, consciousness involves awareness, attention, perception, acts of understanding, and perhaps yet more. Further, Bohm parallels the activity of consciousness with that of the implicate order in general. Consciousness, Bohm notes, can be described in terms of a series of movements. Basically, one movement gives rise to the next, in which context that was previously implicate is now explicate, and while the previous explicate content has become implicate. So the past could be said to be implicate of the explicate now. Consciousness is an interchange. It is a feedback process that results in a growing accumulation of understanding. Bohm considers the human individual to be an intrinsic feature of the universe, which would be incomplete in some fundamental sense if the person did not exist. He believes that individuals participate in the whole and consequently give it meaning. Because of human participation, the implicate order is getting to know itself better. Bohm also senses a new development. The individual is in total contact with the implicate order. The individual is part of the whole of mankind, and he is the focus for something beyond mankind. Using the analogy of transformation of the atom ultimately into power and chain reaction, Bohm believes that the individual who uses inner energy and intelligence can transform mankind. The collectivity of individuals have reached the principle of consciousness of mankind. But they have not quite the energy to reach the whole, to put it all on fire. Fire. So we can see the singular human also as a lens to the whole of reality, the wholeness. Might it be the greater consciousness, God, everything, the universe? So through that lens, both humans and the greater are both participating. Continuing with this theme on transformations of consciousness, Bohm goes on to suggest that an intense heightening of individuals who have shaken off the pollution of ages, that is, wrong worldviews that propagate ignorance, who come into close and trusting relationship with one another, can begin to generate the immense power needed to ignite the whole consciousness of the world. In the depths of the implicate order, there is a conscious deep down of the whole of mankind. That contribute toward the building of consciousness of mankind. There is nothing else to do. There is no other way out. That is absolutely what has to be done, and nothing else can work. Bohm also believes that the individual will eventually be fulfilled upon the completion of cosmic no genesis. No genesis must be the birth of knowledge, coming from gnosis, I believe, referring to all the elements of the cosmos, including human beings as projections of an ultimate reality. Bohm notes that a human being takes part in the process of this totality. He is fundamentally changed in the very activity in which his aim is to change that reality, which is the content of his consciousness. Could we put a pause there and I strike to the next one? Sorry. Short pause. So we continue the lecture, and until now the first part here could be seen as you who are participating in the course Quantum Mechanics at Bilda. Now it's getting more advanced, and I also going to make some conclusions from the aspect of the philosophies we studied before, and I will also make the first segue into the Klein bottle or the toroidal geometry by this article by Dirk K.F. Meyer from the University of Groningen in the Netherlands. I will read the abstract, a little part of the introduction. An attempt is made to model the structure of science and art discovery processes in the light of currently defined ideas of the societal flow of knowledge and conservation of information, using the versatile physical concept of toroidal geometry. It's a tough word. Toroidal geometry. T-O-R-O-E-D-A-L or I-D-A-L. This should be seen as a heuristic model that is open for further development and evolution. The scientific process has often been described as iterative and or recurrent process. Current models explain the generation of new knowledge on the basis of a number of sequential steps, activities, operating in a circular mode. This model intrinsically assumes this process to be congruent for all individual scientific efforts. Yet such a model is obviously inadequate to fully describe the whole integral process of scientific discovery as an ongoing interactive process performed in a cumulative fashion. This implies that any new cycle starts from a different perspective, or optimistically seen, is initiated from a higher level in a spiral mode that takes into account the ongoing rise of scientific perspectives. Also, any model that attempts to picture the scientific process should include potential interactions of concepts of hypothesis, in the sense that concurrently developed concepts may mutually influence each other and even may be mixed or superposed, or alternative may even result in concept extinction. Science and art progression, both seen as individual effort and as a historically based flow of events. Is inherently a non-linear or even sometimes a chaotic process, where quite suddenly arising visions can cast a very different light on mainstream scientific thought, and or seem to remove existing barriers in more traditional habits of mind, in contrast to the rather gradual evolution of science. The history of art sometimes even shows complete rejection of preceding conceptualizations and styles. The dynamics of cognition and perception are fruitfully suggested by the rotational dynamics of a torus as a basis for its self-reflexive property. Also, the torus exhibits contraction-relaxation loops. In which the torus turns inside out in a vibrating mode, implying strange loop trajectories. This suggests that the toroidal geometry embodies a cognitive twist relating the inside to the eyesight of knowledge, as with a Möbius strip, a phenomenon that can be seen as a basis for self-consciousness. The torus geometry may also be applied to the art process on the basis of personal experience, intuitive vision, intention, imagination, and technical realization of the becoming piece of art. The finalization of the art concept can be conceived as a sort of knotting of the spiral information process. By literally connecting both ends of the toroidal information trajectory, the spiral is closed and a final product is created. Importantly, both scientists and artists may be inspired by intuition and serendipity, possibly through contact with an underlying knowledge field, as identified in modern physics. Unfortunately, science that often claims objectivity sometimes seems dominated by a range of subjective human attitudes, not different from any other field in society. One factor is the deficient science philosophical education of our students in the current curricula and loss of academic worldviews in university careers, in which time is short and necessary moments for reflection scarce. Science, its nature and introduction. In the present paper, an attempt is made to model the structure of science and art discovery process in the light of currently defined ideas on how societal flow of knowledge and conservation of information using the versatile physical concept of toroidal geometry. This should be seen as a heuristic model that is open for further development and evolution. Current scientific methodologies do not provide a simple recipe for progress. In this sense, it is not sufficient to follow an automatic set of standards and procedures. Rather, science/art innovation seem to constitute an ongoing cycle of inquiry, constantly developing more useful, accurate and comprehensive models and also methods. For example, when Einstein developed the special and general theories of relativity, he did not refute or discount Newton's Principia. Rather, Einstein's theories can be seen as expansions, refinement on Newton's theories, in which the latter, more classical natural science, can be seen as a nested incurrent model of relative space-time and motion. Usually, the following elements, phases are mentioned in current science methodology. 1. Define a well-formulated question and develop a theory. 2. gather information and search for resources. 3. Form an explanatory hypothesis with some pertinent questions. 4. Develop testable predictions of the particular hypothesis. 5. Test the hypothesis by performing experiments and systematically collect data. 6. Analyze the data and scrutinizing them if relevant by statistics. 7. Interpret the data and draw conclusions that serve as a starting point for a new hypothesis. 8. Publish the results in a transparent manner and/or communicate them otherwise. 9. Retest the inferred concept frequently done by other scientists. So it's an interactive process. The scientific process, in the sense of current methodology, indeed has been often described as an iterative and/or recurrent process. Current models, as the example depicted in Figure 1, attempts to explain the generation of new knowledge on the basis of number of sequential step activities operating in circular mode. The model intrinsically assumes this process to be congruent for all individual scientific endeavors and discovery processes. Yet such a model is obviously inadequate to fully describe the whole integral process of scientific discovery as an ongoing interactive process of such individual efforts being performed in a cumulative fashion. Overall, the particular circular model thus is basically deficient also for a number of other reasons. In any cycle of conceptualizations, information is gained and in general knowledge increases. Thus not a circular but rather a spiral format is at stake. In the discovery process, major negative results and solid rejections of hypotheses can occur, although through falsification of the particular theory, implying implicit setbacks to overcome. The ultimate knowledge may finally improve the scientist's overall picture and improve his or her scientific concept as well as their total scientific worldview. All this occurs against the background of the particular social setting, and it should be stressed that progress in science historically seen was virtually absent for long periods, both due to the lack of technological advancement or through suppression by a dominant scientific establishment and/or religious institutes. Fortunately, contemporary science can be considered a more continuous and cumulative process. This implies that any new cycle starts from a different perspective, or optimistically seen, is initiated from a higher knowledge level. It seems appropriate for this reason to disregard the recurrent cyclic model and replace it by a spiral modality that takes into account the ongoing rise of scientific knowledge and perspectives. Any attempts to picture the scientific process should include potential interactions of concepts or hypotheses, in the sense that concurrently developed concepts may mutually influence each other and even may be mixed or superposed, or alternatively may lead to concept extinction. Two, the basic mechanism of information flow is determined by two major phenomena: an entropic force that produces a lack of information and disorder, as well as a neg-entropic influence through meaningful integration and compression of information. In these opposing elements, central items of information processing, such as quality control, of information and data correction are crucial. Of note, such a flow may include information destruction, replacement, in order to remove excessive noise and information dampening to minimize abundant sidetracking. 3. Any model for this process should take into account converging, gravitational and diverging anti-gravitational influence on the generation of scientific data. For example, due to the impact of external social influences. 4. Science progression has frequently been pictured as a classical Darwinian process, in which scientific theories undergo a sort of evolutionary process, including mutation, selection, and survival of the fittest. In a blindly operating setting without necessity of driving forces. Implicit in such an idea is the absence of teleology, with strong flavors of self-aggregation and emergence, the latter lacking predictive value, always being an explanation in retrospect, after the fact. Yet it's clear that in the science discovery process, an essentially driving force is apparent in the form of human curiosity. While goal-directed aspects are evident, since the final aim of science is to fully understand nature and thereby ourselves. Humans are not only observers of reality, but also active participants. They are not only part of biological evolution, but they directly give form to evolution, and some even say that survival of the fittest is replaced by the conservation of life sustaining information. The fifth, in the creation of scientific thought, apart from rationality and sufficient overview of present scientific knowledge, subjective elements like serendipity, intuitions, and feeling the future can play a major role in scientific breakthroughs and technological innovations. Also, the very important role of directed creativity should be mentioned here. Problem solving is an important activity, yet the primary identifying and exposing of a hidden problem is obviously crucial in this respect. 6. Progress in science requires a solid analysis of the process itself, implying careful observation from an appropriate intellectual distance. This should include the views that are offered by scientific metaphysics. In relation to this, it should be realized that science is a human faculty, and that for deeper penetration into the fabric of reality, it is essential to understand how we observe and interpret with our individual memory as influenced by personal bias. It is urgent to obtain a better insight in the processes of observation, perception, and intuition in relation to the basic human consciousness. Progress in conscious studies may therefore constitute a prerequisite for fundamental progress in science. The design of scientific hypotheses requires both knowledge of the past as well as a vivid anticipation of the future related to the particular concept. This has much to do with the imagination of things could work out. In particular, if cardinal changes would be made in the assumed prerequisites that underlie the present concept, and that may block visions on potential innovation. Information as a product of interaction thereby exhibits a clear dynamic and active character. Seven, in general terms, the building up of scientific knowledge can be viewed upon as a dynamic flow, or even better, a flux of information with an apparent cumulative character. This implies that an integral and accessible knowledge domain should be included. Articles, reports, libraries, data banks, also exemplified by the current dominant internet. In this respect, the basic question has often been asked, where do new ideas actually come from? Are they spontaneously created by human intelligence? Or do humans rather reveal already existing knowledge that is hidden in nature in the form of computational laws? And should we regard novel information rather as unfolding of primordial information, coming from Bohm, of course? 8. Science and art progression, both seen as individual effort and historically based flow of events, is inherently a non-linear or even sometimes a chaotic process, where even relatively small changes can lead to major scientific transformations. My parenthesis, the butterfly effect, or how about 1874 with Morrison and Morrissey. Instead of an ongoing synthetic series of small steps, quite suddenly arising visions can cast a very different light on mainstream scientific thought, and or seem to remove existing barriers in more traditional habits of mind. Such transitions or paradigm changes have often been labeled as scientific revolutions. Newton, Darwin, Einstein, quantum mechanics. Yet such revolutions seem to represent a rather scarce phenomenon. 9. During the course of history, one theory has succeeded another one, and some have suggested further work, while others have seemed content just to explain the phenomena. The reason why one theory replaced another are not always obvious or simple. The philosophy of science includes the question, what criteria is satisfied by a good theory? This question has a long history, and many scientists as well as philosophers have considered it. The objective is to be able to choose one theory as preferable to another without introducing cognitive bias. So this is an extension of the holographic idea that includes the stance you're taking. We could call it the theory, the proposition, and it's included in the toroid. This is how the torus looks like. It's a variety of the Klein bottle. It is based on the Möbius strip, and it shows information or theory. Could you maybe give a hand there? You can. It shows how knowledge is participating in the flow of what comes to exist, so to speak. And here we see an interaction in stance, modus, understanding, attitude, theory, hypothesis, and what it produces, and to see that they are of the same flow. And this is an enlargement of the idea of an interaction between subject and object that we could see earlier in the Klein bottle. This is an expansion that brings the development of knowledge into the point. Stance that we normally cannot think of. It's out of the vision. Let me sort of conclude this and go over to what I mean with this. Well, sometimes this flux of knowledge comes to a halt, and that halt is caused by, it could be an underlying metaphor, a gestalt that hinders further development. The idea of complete objectivity that was ruined in 1874 was an opening of that, because science had come to a halt. It didn't realize that it had a standpoint. It didn't realize it had an observational position. And by not realizing that, it actually blocked science. It hindered science. So it's an underlying dichotomy that is unhealthy for a sound toroidal flux. It's a sort of stop. It's a sort of bumper stop, I would call it. And the idea is, what can we do to open up those things? And I see this, oddly enough, very close to the knots described by Derrida in logocentrism, when dichotomies can establish in a text, and by going into it you can heal by deconstruction to make the flow once more appear. Those blockages seem to dissolve and become information. How can I say that? Well, if you take your standpoint instead of not understanding it's there into consideration, all of a sudden that becomes part of the information of the understanding. Compare the two scenarios. I'm standing here talking to you without the awareness I am doing the talking. I sort of, like Daniel Dellert, eradicated myself. That is a lack of information. If I take my position in contrast to the camera into the whole equation, just like quantum mechanics did, taking the observer into the equation, it's an opening up. All of a sudden my position becomes part of knowing, a factor I can use. I can measure the distance between me and the camera. I can also understand more how well is my voice coming through. Because of disturbances, we have traffic around the corner. There is also some wind coming and going. All those things becomes available for information. And this is why Derrida is not adding to the text. Neither is he taking anything away. He reveals it more in its holonomic entirety. More of the text comes to you and the author. I would read something from Derrida first, from this excellent book by Robert Magliola, Derrida on Demand. And what he points to are healing factors in both Derrida, Heidegger and quantum mechanics. This is from difference, and difference I think is one of those very, very healing factors. Difference is what makes the movement of signification possible. Only if each element called present, appearing on the stage of presence, is related to something other than itself, but is retaining the mark of the past element and is already letting itself be hollowed out by the mark of its relation to the future element. The trace relating no less to what is called the future than to what is called the past, and constituting what is called the present by this very relation to what it is not. I put a parenthesis here. You can also see that existence, or the focus of the now, logocentrism, or metaphysics of presence, can be an obstruction, a speed bump, something that stops the flow of the toroidal knowledge movement. To what it absolutely is not. That is, not even to a past or a future considered as a modified present. In order for it to be an interval, must separate it from what it is not. But this interval that constitutes it in the present must also, with one and the same stroke, divide the present in itself, thus dividing along with the present, everything can be conceived on its basis. So here you see how the present can be the lens, the focal setting from which everything is perceived. By this opening up, it becomes a lens. In particular, for our metaphysical language, the substance or subject, this interval dynamically constituting and dividing itself is what could be called spacing. Times becoming spatial, or why not space becoming temporal. And it is this constitution of the present as an originating and irreducibly non-simple, and therefore in the strict sense non-originating synthesis of marks, of retentions and pretensions, traces. To reproduce here analogically and provisionally a phenomenological and transcendental language that will presently be revealed as inadequate, that I propose to call proto-writing, proto-trace, or difference. He is pointing to the greater before, to the Holomovement, by pointing to the unholo or aholo, he points to the whole. How the unwhole is produced by the whole. In words of Magliola, the irreducibly non-simple, which Derrida evokes above, can only be understood over and against the simple, i.e. the conventional model of presence, or to be more precise in our phrasing, the irreducibly non-simple. The irreducibly non-simple can only be understood as functioning between conventional and an or, in between. The conventional model, and Derrida clearly assumes that it and its dialectal variants are the only viable alternatives to this non-simple, must posit a present which is composed of three qualitatively different presents. There is one, the immediately perceived present, and it must contrast itself with at least the chronologically preceding moment, so there arises a remembrance which is to the past as present. And there must be a contrast as well with the expected future moment, which appears on the scene of presence as free, a future as a present. In a nutshell, the present, as opposed to just sensation, say, cannot exist unless it is qualitatively three presences in one. Though to condense this discussion a bit, we can just designate the non-immediate presences as modified presences. What is more, the three presences must somehow adhere in order to compose one presence. Of free, one is coming. And many philosophers have argued that the only way to explain such adhesion is to posit a presence which is somehow other than mundane presence, a presence with a big P, which is not located within ordinary experiential limits, and thus can elude the nature of ordinary time, and most importantly, which, because of this transcendence, can support the unity of free experiential presence. So something very interesting comes up here. It's a stop. How philosophers before haven't been able to solve this working of the present. They posited, indirectly in most cases, or felt that a bigger present, a transcendental present, that is the metaphysics of presence, so gallantly and eloquently put by Robert Magliola. And this, of course, is a stop. Derrida points to an extended way without changing anything, leaving things as they are, but still extending. And all of a sudden, the speed bump seemed to dissolve without nothing to be added or nothing to being extracted. And this is what the authors from Groningen, Heidegger et al. Is pointing to, how the Toroidal movement can have sort of scrappings that sort of stops it in its flow, and it doesn't flow as fluid as well.
What do you mean with strappings?
It's like if you have a tube, you put a belt around it.
Okay.
And you delimit the flow that is inside.
Okay, so problem is not a...
It's not a problem in the ordinary sense. It is, one could say, from an outside perspective, it can be felt. And it was actually a good example is Lord Kelvin, when he says it's just one decimal lacking. That is that belt. Making come to that conclusion. Analog to how many philosophers have been forced to either posit or hypothesize, or I would say 99% of them, unaware, think of a big P present. That's a stop of knowing. A stop of knowing that is not an ideology, it is not a thinking, it could be called a stance, a modus to some extent. I will parallel this to text in Heidegger, which will conclude this rather elongated lecture, but I think it could be helpful to compare those. This book is so good because it brings both great philosophers in and elucidate them both. It is, however, extremely informational content, condensed. Robert Magliola doesn't want to add a single letter. He takes everything away, so it's very condensed. It's hard to read. Derrida rents the off-way, the anguish of rationalism of the natural man. It shall be my claim that there is a mystical off-rationalism, an off-rationalism which comports a security and liberation, and even enables at will a transaction between the differential and the logocentric. Our investigation of mysticism shall be graduated and methodic. Since one of our main concerns is theory of interpretation, especially literal interpretation. We begin this part too with a practicum involving what is in Derridian terms logocentric rationalism. That is to say, we shall begin with specimens of two monologic interpretations. Two interpretations which are disparate and also to some extent contradictory, and which claim each of them to be solely in the right. Then we shall have recourse to the theory of pluralistic interpretation. One, in other words, which justifies the simultaneous validity of several monologic readings. Why pluralistic theories can be purely rational, I shall be advancing a Heideggerian theory of pluralism. Heideggerian pluralism as a reduction of Heidegger's early and late phases is mystical in radis, and thus can accommodate even contradictory interpretations, as long as the latter are not fanciful. Heidegger's notion of Verstand, as we shall see, and of Sein, constitute a logocentric or centric mysticism. In Derridian terms, there are, you will recall, three kinds of mysticism. Mysticism of plenum, mysticism of void, and three, the unity of opposites, what we are calling theism. Theism.
Ah, yes.
Manifestly, Heidegger's Sein belongs to this third kind, and Derrida himself so classifies it. Derrida argues, of course, that the three mysticisms are just as logocentric, i.e. focused, framed and centered, in their non-rational or affective way, as rationalism is in its logical way. Before my contravention, there is a differential mysticism which is off-rational, and sui generis we now take up Heideggerian thought, Derrida's, and this is complicated, sorry for that, Prajnapati. I will mention that in a later lecture, just ignore it. I will give a short summary of it. And ironically, our own as well. We commence then by way of praxis. Examples from the ambiguous writings of Cervantes, Nietzsche or Kafka are usually adduced here. Our case in point will be Flannery O'Connor's story, The River. O'Connor's compacted plot recounts less than 2 days in the life of a child called Harry, who is 4 or 5 years of age. His mother and father party in their apartment and send him off to babysitters. As the story opens, a Christian woman named Mrs. Connan is about to assume charge of Harry for the day. I will make a summary of the whole story. I would just want to introduce you into the gist of it. In this story, Magliola shows how this mysticism of the free that Derrida said was just the reverse side of the mysticism of rationalism, that is logocentrism, can actually be opened up and seem to partake in a sort of a dance. And this is Toroidal thing opened up this story for me. I read it before it never came to fruition in my mind. But with the toroidal thinking, with this trope, or actually image of the toroid, the double Möbius strip, I came to realize what he tried to show, and that didn't really enter my mind. I'm very sorry that it didn't earlier, but now I understand. He shows a sort of communal dance between the two, the rational and the supposed anti-rational, taking in all stances, and thereby, instead of, as one can usually do, as I've been doing all the time, seeing this as opposing sides, I have not been able to take in both sides, extend, and that is similar to not being able to extend my own position in what I'm doing, not realizing that I have a position here relative to the camera, and hopefully relative to the microphone down here, and that has been working. The same is going on here in Magliola's story. He tries to show that the mysterious and the non-mysterious, even though being of transcendental nature, can taken together and being accepted in their totality as what they are, without adding, without taking away, and without changing. They can be seen as active participant in the toroidal movement of knowing, understanding. And this is also the co-creative process of the universe, the Holomovement in itself.
Okay, let me have it in front of me. So was it page 58, the three things that you mentioned?
Yes,
page
part 2, and it starts at page 57, and it contains into
let me
page
see.
58.
So the 58 about the three, no, the
3 is 57.
Yes, okay. So he mentioned. So let me say. So let me repeat him. So the first.
I can read it if you want.
Yes,
to.
yes. There are three kinds of. Read them slowly. The three kinds of.
Let me just.
We have to digest them. I think.
Mm.
I think they're so important. So plenum is the first word is a Latin word meaning full or something like that. But I don't know what it means there.
I read them and you add your instructions, please. I think that's the best. Let me just. I'm a bit taken back. I worked with this text for 2 years. I think even long. Oh no, 10. Should be whiskey, not tea. This is what I need now to calm my nerves.
Don't worry, I can speak now for you.
No, I would take my responsibility as a lecturer and continue despite my euphoria. I repeat once more, and I put this spot here. It's violet. In Derridian terms, there are, you will recall, 3 kinds of mysticism. Mysticism of the plenum, the void, and the unity of opposites, what we are calling theism. Manifestly, Heidegger's signs belong to this third kind. And Derrida himself so classified it. Okay,
So the thing plenum, okay, it means full. I would say, we don't know what he means exactly in this context. It could mean like horror vacuum, another term. Horror vacuum is a kind of plenum that is something full. For the crisis was something problematic, so you have to feel everything. And that would be the opposite of number 2, void. You have to cover everything. So it's easy to create a mysticism of void, that it's like the black hole. that's a kind of mysticism or horror. You have the horror of the void, but you can also have horror of if everything is if you have something full of something plenum, I suppose. And the third is is the Heidegger's version of the considers opposites. What would he mean? That you need like a man, a female? I don't know, Heidegger spontaneously. What would he mean? That considers opposites. That you, I don't know, spontaneously. I don't know. I have to think about that.
My proposal here, and this is in concord with what Meyer said, and that's an early hypothesis is very important for an understanding, although it being corrected or enlarged later. I would say his is Sein und Zeit as the title of the book, because there is always a battle between Sein and Zeit. I showed the battle before. It is presence with a P. It could also be location with an L. I think that is just great. I say thank you very much for your fantastic patience. And if anybody stayed from the quantum group here, I'm sorry, this is hard stuff. I don't demand you to understand this at all. So I hope maybe you stopped when I finished the first part here. But thank you very much, and God bless you.
Thank you.